All I wanted was one damn cup of coffee. That's it, just me, a chipped mug, and the porch my grandfather built with his own two hands back in the 60s. But instead of caffeine and birdsong, I got Charlene Monroe. Blazer, heels, and all the grace of a court summons, marching up my steps like she was delivering a verdict from Mount HOA. In her freshly manicured claws, a blood-red piece of paper that looked like it'd been printed in hell. "You have 48 hours to vacate," she announced, smiling like a prosecutor who already knew the jury. "Vacate what? My own cabin? The one I inherited, fair and square?" She said it like I was squatting in her guest bathroom, not living on land my family had paid taxes on before she was even born. I laughed. Not a funny laugh, more like the kind you do when reality gets so absurd it forgets how to knock. Tell me where you're tuning in from down in the comments. Texas porch, Florida condo, Midwestern lake house with binoculars pointed at your HOA president? If these wild, justice-packed stories make your coffee taste better and your eyebrows raise higher, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's tale, even crazier, twists, payback, and one HOA mess that'll make today's drama look like a bake sale. You don't want to miss what's coming next. I knew Charlene the way most folks know a snake in the garden. You don't see it until it's coiled, and by then it's usually too late. She moved into Lakeside Overlook 2 years ago and somehow crowned herself Queen of the Water, complete with a clipboard and a monthly newsletter nobody asked for. The woman had a voice like a leaf blower at 6 a.m. and a passion for regulations that would make the IRS blush, and now she was standing on my porch, telling me that my grandfather's cabin, a place built with love, cedar planks, and more wisdom than a dozen HOA handbooks, was violating some freshly cooked-up aesthetic code. "It's an eyesore," she said, "bringing down the neighborhood's value," which was rich, considering her lawn gnomes were dressed like Revolutionary War reenactors, and her mailbox was painted like a bald eagle giving birth to a flag. I should have said something smart, something firm, but instead my voice came out like wet toast. "Ma'am, I've got the deed, inheritance papers, my grandfather—" "Old papers don't beat new laws," she cut in, waving her red document like it had divine authority. "You're under the jurisdiction of the Lakeside Overlook Homeowners Association. Now, this property needs to be remodeled or removed." And with that, she pressed the notice into my palm like she was handing me my own execution date. My hand shook as I took it. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was memory, the kind of memory that lives in your bones. I was 12 the last time someone in a government-grade outfit stood on our porch and told us we didn't belong on our own land. They called it a zoning update. My dad called it theft with a signature. And now, here I was, grown, holding another document I didn't ask for, watching history tap dance on repeat. Just as I was about to retreat into my house and hyperventilate in private, a voice floated in from across the yard. "A lovely day for a neighborhood shakedown, isn't it, Miss Monroe?" We both turned to see Eugene Clay, 72, half-deaf and fully prepared, standing on his porch with a camera the size of a small microwave. Eugene's idea of a good time was watching squirrels fight over walnuts and documenting every suspicious squirrel-adjacent activity. Charlene rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might detach. "You can't film me without permission, old man," she hissed. Eugene grinned and adjusted his lens. "You're on his property, ma'am, making legal threats. Pretty sure that's fair game." Her expression soured like milk in July. "This isn't over, Mr. Landry," she said, low and venomous, as she turned and walked away. Her heels clicked down the driveway like I stood there, paper in hand, coffee long forgotten, wondering if I'd just had a bad dream or the start of a very real war. That red paper sat on my kitchen table like it had paid rent. The rest of my day disappeared in a haze of panic and Google searches. Architectural violations, permit codes, forced compliance. I read until my eyes burned and my soul tried to sneak out through the back door. Every phrase sounded like it was designed to confuse and conquer. I tried to work, had a site report due for a client up in Carson Ridge, but my brain had turned to oatmeal. And not the nice kind, the kind that's lumpy and cold and sticks to everything, especially your sense of self-worth. By the time the sun dipped below the lake, casting everything in gold, I was standing barefoot on my porch, watching the water and trying to remember what peace used to feel like. This wasn't just about siding and shingles, it was about something deeper. Something sacred. Charlene Monroe wanted my house, my land, my silence, and I had 48 hours to figure out if I was gonna fight or fold. The next morning, before I'd even put cream in my coffee, Eugene Clay was already pacing on my porch like a man who knew something and couldn't wait to spill it. He had a manila folder under one arm and a thermos under the other, which I assumed was filled with coffee, but might have just been gasoline, because the fire he brought that morning, it lit up everything I thought I knew. "Noah," he said, not even waiting for a chair, "you're not just her target. You're the blueprint." He slapped the folder onto my porch table like it was a crime scene dossier and opened it with the kind of reverence most folks reserve for birth certificates or last wills. Inside were photos, printed emails, meeting minutes, even a map with red string. I'm not joking, there was actual red string. "I call it the Charlene Files," he said, because how to steal a neighborhood felt too on the nose. And just like that, my little problem with an HOA Karen turned into something out of a political thriller. Stay seated. This thing gets darker. Eugene, retired Air Force and full-time neighborhood watchdog, had turned paranoia into performance art. He owned more recording devices than our local news station and could quote zoning ordinances like they were baseball stats. But this wasn't just hobby-level nosiness. This was full-blown investigative work. He showed me time-stamped photos of Charlene meeting with a parade of strangers. Contractors, county officials, surveyors, always just outside property lines, always with documents in hand. "She's been plotting this for 18 months, Eugene said, tapping the folder like it owed him money. "Your cabin's not an eyesore, it's a bullseye. Older structure, transfer of deed, vulnerability. No formal HOA bylaws until she wrote them herself. The woman hadn't just declared a homeowners association, she'd built a land trap, disguised as a committee, and every neighbor had unknowingly stepped onto the board game she was rigging. One wrong move and boom, you're out of the game. Don't blink now, because we haven't even hit the corner of the board." What really fried my circuits was how subtle it all was. Charlene didn't scream, she slipped in. Like a draft under the door, she used language the average person wouldn't question. Compliance checks, property beautification standards, architectural harmony. It all sounded reasonable until Eugene translated it for me, legal pressure disguised as lawn advice. She'd filed over a dozen anonymous complaints under different names. Half the neighbors didn't even know they'd been reported, just thought a notice on their door was normal HOA noise. But when Eugene compared the language on the reports to Charlene's emails, identical phrasing, same tone, same bullet points. She wasn't building a community, he said. She was buying silence with paperwork. And suddenly it hit me. This wasn't personal anymore. It was systemic. I wasn't just her problem, I was her prototype. If she could take me out, the rest would fall like dominoes. Don't walk away yet, because Eugene was just getting warmed up. He flipped to a section labeled Target Zones and pointed to my cabin. "You were Phase 1, he said. Rick Brayer's next, followed by the Harrington property. Each one was an older home with some paperwork quirk or unclear boundary history. She wasn't cleaning up the neighborhood, she was hunting weak titles. "She's using HOA structure-like legal camouflage," Eugene said, "and most of these folks don't even realize they've been marked. That's what makes it brilliant. And dangerous. The worst part? County records showed a suspicious uptick in planning visits, permit rejections, and zoning challenges, always following Charlene's meetings. It was like watching a magician. While everyone was distracted by her show of neighborhood beautification, the real trick was happening under the table. And it wasn't just a few houses. It was the whole lakefront. Curious yet? You should be, because Eugene had one more bomb to drop before leaving. Right before he left, Eugene leaned in, lowered his voice like we were surrounded by bugs and knowing him we might have been, and said, There's more. Way more. County archives, old deeds, survey disputes. Even your grandfather's name comes up in the early records. My pulse did a full drum solo. I've only scratched the surface, he added. But if you're willing to dig, and I mean really dig, we might be able to stop her before she flips this whole lake into a development deal. And with that he stood, nodded, and walked off with the folder like a man carrying a detonator. I sat there, mug in hand, brain full of land theft, legal manipulation, and red string. I'd gone from sipping coffee to staring down a real estate chess match I never knew I was playing. But one thing was clear. Charlene Monroe didn't just want my porch. She wanted the whole board. And I wasn't folding anymore. You're going to want to stick around for what we dig up next. It didn't take long before Charlene stopped pretending. Subtle became surgical. The red paper had been the handshake. What followed felt like a professionally staged takedown, just without the trench coats and soundtrack. First came the code enforcement team. They showed up like they were looking for buried bodies. Flashlights, clipboards, and the kind of expressions you only see when someone's trying to pretend they aren't enjoying themselves. The lead guy, Rodriguez, apologized as he measured my gutter length and made notes about porch clearance irregularities. Irregularities? The man was writing poetry about roof pitch. I asked what prompted the visit and got the answer I'd come to expect. We received multiple complaints that just happened to mirror Charlene's HOA violations word for word. At that point, I wasn't sure if I was living in my home or starring in a bad reality show called Gotcha, Lakeside Edition. But I stayed calm, mostly because I thought that was the worst it would get. I was wrong. So wrong, you'd think I owed the woman money in a past life. Within 48 hours, my inbox started glowing like a Vegas slot machine. Except instead of jackpots, I was getting contract cancellations. The development firm up in Carson Ridge backed out of the archaeological survey I'd been prepping for 6 weeks, due to concerns regarding professional integrity, the email said. Concerns? I hadn't missed a deadline since 2009, and even then it was because a raccoon chewed through my laptop cable. I called my contact at the firm. He sounded nervous, like someone reading a script while staring at a lawyer. We received anonymous reports questioning your credentials and your ability to follow ethical procedures in the field. I laughed, mostly because my only ethical crime was occasionally using office coffee without refilling the pot. But the damage was done. She didn't just want me gone. She wanted me discredited. Charlene hadn't come for my house. She came for my name. And the scariest part? She didn't leave fingerprints. But the timing? Oh, the timing fit like a custom-tailored suit. Stick with me. This is where sleep starts losing the fight. By day 4, I wasn't sleeping. Not really. Charlene had taken to deploying her personal landscaping crew at exactly 5:58 minutes before noise ordinances kicked in. They'd start with the leaf blowers, then crank up the industrial wood chipper for good measure. If psychological warfare had a sound, it was a chipper chewing nothing. At night, she'd flip on these giant motion sensor floodlights that aimed directly into my windows like prison yard security. I tried blackout curtains, earplugs, herbal tea, whiskey, you name it. Nothing worked. My brain was melting faster than a popsicle in Phoenix, and when your body's exhausted, your mind goes with it. I started second-guessing every document, rereading every clause, pacing the porch like a lost dog. I even checked the mailbox 4 times one afternoon because I forgot if I'd already done it. Charlene didn't have to physically evict me. She was turning my life into a noise-saturated, sleep-deprived panic box. And I'll admit it, I started thinking about giving up, not because she was right, but because she was relentless. But then the text came. It buzzed in at 11:43 p.m., right as I was staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was still technically an archaeologist or just a guy with a lot of stress and expired licensure. The message was from a number I didn't recognize. "Hey, it's Rick Breyer from Maple Drive. I need to talk to you about Charlene and your grandfather. Can we meet?" Now, Rick and I had exchanged nods at HOA meetings and maybe shared a plate of potato salad once, but we'd never had a real conversation. Quiet guy. Kept to himself, one of those neighbors you always assume has an organized garage and strong opinions about mulch. So to hear from him, out of the blue, at midnight, that wasn't casual, that was confession-level timing. I texted back, tomorrow, 8 a.m., my porch. And I didn't sleep a minute after that. Because something about the way he said your grandfather made my stomach twist. Oh, you want to know what he knew too, don't you? The next morning, I didn't even need coffee. Adrenaline had replaced caffeine in my bloodstream. I stood on that porch waiting like it was a job interview for my sanity. Because if Rick had answers about Charlene, about my grandfather, about why I was suddenly the neighborhood's most wanted, I needed them. And fast. Because when someone starts erasing your name, the last thing you do is sit still and let the ink dry. Stick around. You're about to learn why Rick Breyer might be the last person standing between me and total erasure. Rick Breyer showed up right on time, looking like a man who hadn't slept either, but for very different reasons. He brought a notebook full of scribbled lines and a nervous energy that practically buzzed off him. I need you to know, I didn't sign that petition because I hated your cabin, he said, before even sitting down. Charlene made it sound like it was just for neighborhood safety. Nothing serious. His voice cracked on safety, like the word itself was fragile. Then he hit me with the real payload. Your grandfather taught a local land use class at the community college back in the day. I took it when I first moved here. I blinked. That was new? My grandfather? A man who measured trust in teaspoons, never said a word about teaching. Rick pulled out a photocopy of an old class syllabus with my grandfather's name on it and said, he used your family's property as a case study. He said if anyone ever challenged ownership, the truth would be in the original documents, not the new assumptions. And just like that, the air shifted. It didn't feel like defense anymore. It felt like a treasure hunt. And I was suddenly very interested in what my grandfather had left buried. I spent the rest of that morning in the basement, wrestling with cardboard boxes, cobwebs, and the ghosts of paper cuts past. My grandfather had kept everything: tax receipts, warranty slips for tools long rusted, letters from land offices, even a 1972 parking ticket he'd apparently fought all the way to a county judge. But it was the fourth box that stopped me cold. Tucked in the corner, wrapped in an old towel that smelled like cedar and history, was a metal strongbox with a brass dial and a piece of tape across the top. The handwriting on the tape was instantly recognizable, blocky, deliberate, and all caps. I sat there, staring at it like it might explode or disappear. When someone leaves you a time bomb made of truth, you don't rush to cut the wire. You listen first, you breathe, and then you try to remember the code. Stay with me, because this is the part where everything flips. The lock required 4 digits. I tried his birthday, his address, the year the cabin was built. Nothing. Then I remembered the funeral, when the pastor said my grandfather always referred to the day my grandmother died as the day I learned how deep roots grow when the rain won't stop. Morbid? Sure. But knowing him, that was the moment he realized what mattered. I punched in the date of her passing. The lock clicked open like it had just been waiting for someone who understood. Inside the box was a thick envelope labeled Deed Full Property and a letter. I started with the paper trail. The deed was real, old, official. It said he hadn't just bought the cabin lot. He'd purchased 52 acres of lakefront land, including 65% of the water itself. The map was hand-drawn, yes, but it matched the legal coordinates perfectly. Charlene's house? On my land. Rick's? Mine too. Half the HOA's sacred turf? You guessed it, rightfully, under the name of one very tired archaeologist who suddenly had a legal grenade in his lap. Now, imagine finding out your enemies built their kingdom in your backyard. That's not just flipping the script. That's flipping the genre. Western? Try political thriller. The letter was what wrecked me. My grandfather, writing like he'd seen this day coming, said, "Noah, if you're opening this, someone's trying to take what's ours. Don't let fear win this time. This land was paid for twice, once with money, once with principle. Use the law. Use your name, and don't back down. I brought the documents to Eugene, who damn near choked on his coffee. Son, he said, holding up the deed like it was a constitution, this doesn't just protect your cabin, this rewrites the whole neighborhood. We looped in attorney Lena Ford, a local legend in land rights with the kind of voice that made judges rethink their rulings. She looked through the documents, flipped the final page, and just said, "Well, damn." That's the legal equivalent of a mic drop. Charlene didn't know it yet, but she'd built her empire on a sandbar, and the tide had just rolled in. For the first time since this mess began, I felt taller, not cocky, just rooted, like the cabin itself had grown up through my spine. Lena confirmed everything. The deed was valid, the boundaries enforceable, and the history bulletproof. The county clerk's office even had the purchase on microfilm, which Lena found deeply satisfying. "We're not just holding the high ground," she said. "We own it." I wasn't just some guy being harassed by an HOA queenpin. I was the rightful owner of her throne. And believe me, I wasn't interested in revenge. I was interested in clarity, in sunlight, in letting every single person in this neighborhood see just how far Charlene had pushed things and how one little locked box had shifted the shoreline of power. But the best part? We hadn't even played our hand yet. And when we did, let's just say Charlene wasn't going to see it coming. Stay close, because next, we take this truth public. If HOA drama had an opening act, Charlene gave it Broadway lighting and a rented sound system. She called it a community crisis forum, printed invitations on ivory cardstock, and made personal calls to county council members like she was hosting a charity gala, not a neighborhood ambush. It was held at the Community Pavilion, a place usually reserved for potlucks and suspiciously competitive bake-offs, but that night it looked like a courtroom built by Martha Stewart. Folding chairs in perfect rows, a banner that read, "Protecting Our Neighborhood Integrity." The irony nearly dislocated my jaw. I walked in with Lena, Eugene, and Rick at my side, like we were auditioning for a legal-themed buddy movie. Charlene was already working the crowd, smiling like she'd been elected queen of property values. The room had at least 60 people in it, most of whom had no idea they were about to witness the HOA equivalent of a controlled burn. Charlene kicked off the show with a slideshow full of creative photography. She'd taken pictures of my cabin from the worst possible angles, ones that made a creaky porch look like a collapsed deck and cast natural wood grain as structural decay. Her tone was righteous, like someone doing battle with mold and mildew instead of a homeowner with a legal deed. She even brought in experts, a guy from her brother-in-law's landscaping crew, and someone she introduced as a contractor with 30 years' experience who looked suspiciously like the same man who once installed her patio lights. They tossed around terms like structural risk, community devaluation, and my personal favorite, aesthetic disharmony. I swear, they made my cabin sound like it was actively lowering lifespans. It would have been laughable if people hadn't started nodding, concerned. I looked around and realized she wasn't just spinning a story, she was staring fear like a steering wheel. But then the room shifted, and the reason was wearing orthopedic shoes and holding a tube in her hands. "Excuse me," Betty Yates said, rising from her seat like she was about to testify at a war tribunal. Everyone turned, even Charlene, whose confidence flickered like a bulb in a thunderstorm. Betty walked to the front and unrolled a hand-drawn map, yellowed at the edges and beautiful in its precision. "This was made for me by Harold Landry in 1985, she said. "He gave it to me so I'd always know where not to plant my trees." Some chuckles rippled, but Betty wasn't kidding. "What you see here matches the original survey from 1962, the same one filed at the county records office. The map showed every shoreline curve, every boundary, and, most importantly, every home built on land that legally belonged to my grandfather, including Charlene's. It was HOA Broadway, until Betty stole the stage with Act 1. Suddenly people were leaning in, whispering, eyes darting toward the legal gray zone under their own foundations. Stick with me. We weren't even at the fireworks yet. Lena stepped up next with the confidence of someone who'd spent years making liars sweat in depositions. She laid out the deed, the survey documents, and copies of the county's land office records. "This isn't a matter of opinion," she said, her voice calm and slicing. "This is a matter of public record. Mr. Landry's ownership predates any HOA charter, ordinance, or aesthetic opinion, including the one about his porch railing." The crowd laughed nervously, but the message landed. People began pulling out their phones, checking old title insurance documents, texting spouses. Charlene tried to object, something about outdated documents and modern community standards, but Lena shut her down with a line I'll never forget. "You don't fight greed with noise, you fight it with notarized truth." It was over right then and there. Charlene didn't know it yet, but her show had closed early. No curtain call, just cold silence. Charlene stood there, clutching her clipboard like it was a lifeline, eyes darting like someone realizing they just got caught shoplifting at a family reunion. "This isn't over," she snapped, her voice brittle and sharp. "You think you're clever, Noah, with your old papers and your nostalgia for broken-down cabins? You have no idea what I'm capable of." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise from someone who couldn't win clean and knew it. Then she stormed out. Heels pounding, papers flying, reputation smoldering. The room stayed quiet for a beat, like everyone needed a second to catch up to what just happened. Then came the apologies. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months came up to shake my hand. A woman who once voted to limit unsightly garden decor gave me a hug. One guy offered to rebuild my fence for free, or at least a decent discount. And as they left, I saw them look back, not at Charlene's empire, but at the woman who brought a map and the man who finally opened a box. We'd won round one, but I had a feeling Charlene wasn't done swinging. And the next punch might land before sunrise. If you've never been jolted awake at 3:30 in the morning by your 72-year-old neighbor banging on your front door while shouting, "Noah, she brought trucks!" I don't recommend it. Eugene was out of breath, wearing mismatched flannel and clutching binoculars like a war correspondent. "They've got equipment down by the lake," he said. "Bulldozer, crew, lights. It's happening now." I stumbled outside barefoot and half-blind and saw the beams. Headlights bobbing like ghost ships through the trees. An excavator was creeping toward my cabin, slow and deliberate, like it had all the paperwork it needed and none of the morality. Figures in reflective vests moved around it, and behind them, just out of reach of the light, was a familiar silhouette in a trench coat. Charlene, cool as a cucumber on the wrong side of the law. She tried to erase history with steel claws. But the lake remembered, and so did Eugene and me. I finally remembered how to fight back. I called 911 while Eugene rang up Lena and Tom. Within 20 minutes, blue and red lights tore across the shoreline like righteous fire. The sheriff's deputies arrived first, and the moment their boots hit the gravel, the vibe shifted. What had felt like a private nightmare was now a public reckoning. The crew, day laborers, confused and nervous, told officers they were hired to clear a condemned structure. One guy held up a laminated sheet of fake county orders, another muttered something about a safety hazard. But when the deputy asked who hired them, every flashlight turned toward Charlene. She didn't flinch. She tried to explain it away, throwing out legal phrases she must have pulled off Google: emergency authority, community danger, expedited demolition. But the moment County Inspector Williams showed up and confirmed no such order existed, Charlene's confidence cracked like glass under a work boot. You could practically hear the air hissing out of her authority. The real kicker came when they started making calls. County records, planning office, the clerk's emergency line. And suddenly, what looked like petty HOA lunacy unraveled into full-blown corruption. Turns out Charlene hadn't just bullied neighbors. She'd been paying off a clerk at the planning department for backdated approvals, fake inspections, and fraudulent complaint records. $20,000, 0 cents, in consulting fees over the last 2 years. Lena, bless her ironclad patience, had brought documentation from our earlier discovery and laid it out for the officers like it was a chessboard. Charlene's responses went from smug to sputtering to silent. By sunrise, she was in handcuffs, charged with trespassing, attempted destruction of private property, fraud, conspiracy, and bribery of a public official. Her kingdom wasn't just collapsing. It was being catalogued, tagged for evidence, and loaded into the back of a cruiser. You could almost hear the HOA newsletter titles rewriting themselves in real time. Over the next few weeks, everything changed. Charlene's house went on the market within days, legal fees don't pay themselves, and the HOA held an emergency vote to dissolve. The same people who once applauded her PowerPoints now tripped over themselves to distance their names. Rick stepped up as a temporary neighborhood liaison and formed a voluntary association focused on actual neighborly cooperation. No fines, no bylaws about mailbox color, just folks who wanted to protect the lake and sleep in peace. Eugene was officially appointed head of the new watch group, which mostly meant giving him a title for what he'd already been doing with binoculars and post-it notes. And me? I spent that summer sorting through the rest of my grandfather's documents, selling off small land strips to neighbors whose homes overlapped the property line, all at fair prices and with proper contracts. It wasn't just cleanup, it was reclamation, restoration. Peace doesn't mean silence. It means no more threats at sunrise. 8 months later, I got the final call from Lena. Charlene had pled guilty to multiple charges and was sentenced to 18 months in county jail, 3 years of probation, and over $75,000, 0 cents, in restitution. "She's moving out of state," Lena said. "Somewhere that doesn't know her history yet." I stood by the lake, phone in hand, and let the quiet settle in my bones. That cabin, still creaky, still weathered, still mine. And now, protected not just by law, but by people who'd seen what happens when you let fear wear a name tag and carry a clipboard. I thought about my grandfather, about how he'd prepared for a battle I never wanted, but had to finish. His legacy wasn't just property. It was proof that standing your ground doesn't always mean shouting. Sometimes it means showing up with papers and patience and the unshakable knowledge that what's right doesn't need permission to exist. And if you've stayed with me this far, just know, next time someone shows up with a notice and a fake smile, ask them one thing. Do you really know whose land you're standing on? And just like that, it was over. Not with a bang, not with a bulldozer, but with a courtroom signature and a quiet lake that finally felt like home again. I didn't win because I yelled louder. I didn't win because I played dirty. I won because I remembered who I was, where I came from, and what I was willing to protect. My grandfather didn't leave me a fortune. He left me something better, a reminder that legacy isn't measured in square footage or fence height. It's measured in how far you'll go to stand up when someone tries to take what's already yours. This story, it isn't just about me or some lakeside HOA queen pin on a power trip. It's about how easy it is for fear to slip through the cracks in your confidence, and how powerful it is when you plug those cracks with truth. It's about the paper trail that outlives the bully, the neighbor who watches out when no one else will, the quiet guy who speaks up when it counts. If you've ever been underestimated, boxed in, or backed into a corner by someone with a title and a rule book, they didn't know who they were dealing with. Not yet. So if this story made you think twice, made you laugh, made you clench your jaw or pump your fist, do me a favor. Like the video, hit subscribe, and drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you've ever met a Charlene in your life, and more importantly, tell me what you kept standing for when someone tried to push you off your own porch. Because around here, we don't just tell stories. We pass on the kind of wisdom you can't Google. The next episode? Let's just say someone else is about to find out what happens when you try to bury the truth and it comes back wearing work boots. Don't miss it. And remember, peace isn't quiet. It's earned.